Standing still in moving water. A story of stillness and flow. Chapter 1. The whirlwind. The trading floor was a storm of human ambition, a place where fortunes were made and shattered in the breath between seconds. For Alex, it was a crucible. The air itself was electric, thick with the scent of stale coffee and frantic desperation, a symphony of shouted orders and the relentless, hypnotic flicker of numbers across a dozen screens. Each tick was a pulse, a siren's call to action or retreat, and Alex was caught in the riptide. Fingers flew across the keyboard, a frantic dance of buy and sell orders, each click a gamble against the unforgiving clock of the market's closing bell. There was no time for thought, only for reaction. A green blip on the chart was a shot of adrenaline, a red dip a cold spike of fear. Every decision felt urgent, life or death, a battle fought in the space between heartbeats. Driven by the frantic energy of the room, Alex chased momentum, buying into a tech stock that was climbing on a wave of speculative frenzy. The initial climb was intoxicating, a validation of the impulse. But the market, that great and mercurial beast, shifted without warning. A whisper of bad news, a single analyst downgrade, and the climb reversed into a nosedive. Panic, cold and sharp, replaced the thrill. The numbers bled red, a digital hemorrhage that mirrored the sinking feeling in Alex's gut. Instead of a calculated exit, a fresh wave of impulsiveness took over, a desperate attempt to average down, to outsmart the plummet. It was a catastrophic error. The sell-off accelerated, a cascade of automated stops triggering, and Alex was just another piece of driftwood caught in the avalanche. When the final bell rang, its electronic chime was a death knell. The storm on the floor subsided into an exhausted murmur, leaving behind the wreckage of the day. Alex slumped back in the chair, the leather groaning in protest. The screens now displayed the brutal, unchangeable math of the loss. It was a significant chunk of the quarter's gains, evaporated in less than an hour. The adrenaline that had been a lifeblood now receded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The chaotic noise of the day replayed in their mind, the shouts, the flickering digits, the frantic, thoughtless clicks of the mouse. It was all just noise. A dizzying, disorienting whirlwind where any sense of control had been a complete and utter illusion. Staring at the static numbers, a single, clear question cut through the fatigue. What was the point of all that motion? All that frantic energy, that performative busyness, had only led to this moment of stillness and defeat. The control Alex had felt was a mirage, a story told to survive the chaos. The real force, the true current, was something far larger and more indifferent than any single trader. The whirlwind had not been conquered, it had simply passed through, and Alex was left standing in its wake, stripped bare and questioning everything. Chapter 2. A glimpse of calm. The silence of the apartment was a physical presence after the day's cacophony, a heavy blanket that seemed to absorb the last echoes of the trading floor's frenzy. Alex moved through the rooms on autopilot, the ghost of flickering screens still imprinted on their vision. The urge to check after-hours futures, to seek some form of digital penance or hope, was a powerful itch, but a deeper weariness won out. Instead, they found themselves in front of a tall oak bookcase, its shelves a quiet testament to a life lived before charts and ticker symbols. Their fingers trailed absently across the spines of forgotten novels and old college textbooks, a journey through a past self. It was tucked between a heavy world atlas and a faded volume on local botany, its simple wooden frame a stark contrast to the sleek black monitors of the office. Alex pulled it out, the GL back cool against their skin. The photograph was slightly faded, the colors softened by years of sunlight, but the memory it held was crystalline. There he was, a boy of no more than 10, standing knee-deep in a river that sparkled under a vast, open sky. Beside him stood his grandfather, a man whose face was a roadmap of kindness and quiet strength, his hands gently guiding Alex's smaller ones on the cork grip of a fly rod. The water swirled around their waders, a liquid GL back reflecting the deep greens of the overhanging pines. In an instant, the sterile air of the apartment was gone, replaced by the rich, loamy scent of damp earth and river stone. Alex could feel the cool, insistent push of the current against their legs, a steady, grounding force. He could hear the whisper of the line slicing through the air, a software thump that was the soundtrack to patience. There was no goal, no frantic race against a clock. There was only the rhythm, the slow, deliberate backcast, the pause, the gentle forward presentation of the fly. His grandfather never rushed. He would stand for minutes, sometimes hours, just reading the water, watching for the subtle rise of a trout, understanding the flow before ever making a cast. His success wasn't measured in quantity, but in the quality of the connection, the perfect drift of the fly, the subtle take, the respectful fight and release. The memory was so vivid it was an ache, a profound longing for that specific brand of stillness. The parallel struck with the force of a physical blow. The river, with its complex currents and hidden eddies, was no less chaotic than the financial markets. But his grandfather hadn't fought the current, he had learned to stand within it, to find the still points from which to act. The fly rod wasn't a tool of force, but of finesse and precise communication with the flow. The patience required to wait for the right fish and the right seam of water was the absolute antithesis of the impulsive, reactive gambling that had defined Alex's day. The market was a river, and Alex had been thrashing in the rapids, desperately trying to swim against the current instead of learning to read its flow. The photograph, a frozen moment of perfect tranquility, offered not an escape, but a blueprint. It was a glimpse of a different way to exist amidst the chaos, a way that required not more noise, but more silence. Not more action, but more presence. Chapter 3. The first lesson. The river did not care about impatience. It flowed with an ancient, unhurried grace, a silver ribbon winding through a cathedral of pine and stone, its constant murmur a stark contrast to the remembered shrieks of the trading floor. Alex stood at its edge, the new waiters feeling stiff and alien, the fly rod an unfamiliar weight in their hands. The intention had been pure to recapture the serenity of the photograph, to find that anchored calm in the moving water. But the body, still thrumming with the residual urgency of the city, betrayed that intention from the first cast. The line did not sing, it thrashed. Instead of a graceful loop unrolling over the water, it piled up in a tangled mess on the surface with a loud, discouraging slap. A second attempt sent the fly snapping back, narrowly missing an ear. A third resulted in a hopeless bird's nest of leader and tippet snarled around the rod tip. Frustration, a familiar and bitter heat, bloomed in Alex's chest. This was supposed to be meditation, but it felt like failure. Each clumsy presentation was just another lost trade, another missed opportunity. The mind, conditioned to seek immediate results, began to calculate the wasted minutes, the inefficiency of standing in cold water for zero return. The river's gentle sounds became an accusation. Then, as Alex paused to pick apart the knot with fumbling, cold-numbed fingers, the memory surfaced, not as a vague nostalgia, but as a clear, instructional echo. His grandfather's voice, weathered and gentle as river stone, seemed to ride on the breeze. "You're not casting at the water, Alex. You're having a conversation with it. First, you have to listen." Alex's frantic movement stilled. They looked up, truly looked, for the first time. They saw how the main current carved a powerful, slick channel down the center, but how along the banks, the water slowed, creating gentle eddies where leaves spun in lazy circles. They noticed a large, submerged boulder that broke the flow, creating a soft, protective pillow of slower water just behind it, a perfect resting spot for a fish. They saw the way the sunlight dappled through the trees, illuminating tiny insects dancing just above the surface. This was what he had meant by reading the water. It was a language of hydraulics and light, of structure and rhythm. Letting the tangled line drift, Alex simply watched. They observed a single mayfly struggle from its nymphal shuck on a half-submerged log, its wings drying in the sun. They saw the small, dimpling sip of a trout taking a natural fly from the surface in a quiet seam along the far bank. There was no frenzy, no violent strike. It was a quiet, confident acceptance. The lesson was not about the catch, it was about the wait. It was about understanding that the right moment was not something to be forced, but something to be recognized. With a deep, deliberate breath that filled their lungs with the scent of wet stone and pine, Alex lifted the rod again. This time, the motion was different. There was no whip crack of impatience. The backcast was slow, feeling for the weight of the line to load the rod, pausing high to let it straighten behind. The forward cast was not a punch, but a gentle acceleration and stop, allowing the energy to transfer down the line, turning it over to lay the fly upon the water as softly as a falling leaf. It wasn't perfect, but it was a cast, not a thrashing. The fly landed just upstream of the boulder's cushion and began its drift, a tiny speck riding the current naturally. No fish rose. It didn't matter. In that single, focused presentation, the frantic noise in Alex's mind finally quieted. There was only the arc of the line, the drift of the fly, and the endless, patient flow of the river. For the first time all day, Alex was not chasing anything. They were simply, completely, there. Chapter 4. Translating the flow. The Monday morning trading floor felt like a different country, one Alex had returned to with a foreign passport. The same screens flickered with the same frantic data, the same voices rose in urgent pitches, but the storm now seemed to exist outside a newly built pane of glass. Alex settled into the chair, the memory of the river's cool embrace a tangible shield against the rising tide of pre-market anxiety. The old instincts, the twitch in the fingers, the quickened pulse at a green spike, were still there, humming just beneath the surface like a dormant engine. But today, they were not in the driver's seat. Instead of diving into the chaos, Alex began to read the market as they had learned to read the river. The scrolling numbers and candlestick charts were no longer just signals for action, they were currents, seams, and eddies. A rapid upward surge in a tech stock was the powerful, central current, tempting but dangerous to enter without a plan. A period of sideways consolidation was a quiet backwater, a place of rest and potential. The frantic buying and selling of others were like mayflies skittering on the surface, creating distracting ripples but not indicating the deeper, more meaningful movements below. Alex watched it all, hands resting on the desk, breathing slow and deep. They observed how certain stocks moved in relation to others, how sectors ebbed and flowed with the news cycle, identifying the submerged boulders of support and resistance that shaped the market's flow. The first opportunity arose not from a shout or a dramatic spike, but from a subtle pattern of resilience. A semiconductor stock had been beaten down by a negative earnings report, its chart a bloody mess of red candles. But over the next hour, as the broader market wobbled, it refused to make a new low. It was finding its level, creating a soft cushion of support, just like the calm water behind a rock in the river. The old Alex would have seen the initial drop and either panicked or tried to catch the falling knife in a desperate gamble. The new Alex simply watched, waited, and saw the moment of stability. The entry was not a frantic click, but a deliberate, almost gentle execution. A small position, a manageable risk, placed with the patience of presenting a fly to a wary trout. The trade did not explode into instant profit. It drifted, sometimes dipping back into the red, testing their resolve. The old hunger for immediate gratification whispered to close it, to take a tiny loss and move on to the next frantic chance. But Alex remembered the long, patient waits on the river, the understanding that the prize often went to those who could endure the uneventful drifts. They held, not with white-knuckled hope, but with a quiet confidence in their read of the water. An hour later, a small piece of positive industry news surfaced, and the stock, already stabilized, lifted on the gentle current. It was not a dramatic surge, but a steady, confident climb. Alex exited the position with a modest, clean gain. It was a small success, insignificant in the grand scheme of the day's volatile swings, but it felt profoundly different. It was not a victory snatched from chaos, but a reward harvested from patience. It was the first clear translation of the river's wisdom, a perfect, deliberate cast into the market's flow that had resulted in a quiet, respectful connection. The balance was no longer a theoretical concept, it was a felt reality in the space between action and awareness. Chapter 5. The Still Point. The alarm was a shriek in the pre-dawn darkness, but it did not find Alex adrift in restless sleep. They were already awake, the mind calm, the body still, having dreamed not of numbers but of water. The commute to the trading floor was a silent meditation, the city's early stirrings a distant hum. When Alex took their seat, the screens bloomed to life not as portals to chaos, but as a vast, digital river waiting to be read. The calm held, a deep-rooted stillness cultivated on the riverbank. Then the news hit. A surprise geopolitical announcement, unexpected and stark, flashed across every terminal. The market, that great fluid entity, convulsed. Instantly, the floor erupted into a frenzy of panic. Colleagues were on their feet, voices raw, faces etched with the terror of sudden, uncontrolled movement. Charts bled a violent, uniform red, the digital equivalent of a flash flood. The old Alex would have been swept away in that torrent, reacting with blind fear or desperate, impulsive gambles. But the new Alex remained seated, breathing into the storm. The panic in the room was just surface noise, the frantic splashing of those who had forgotten how to swim. Alex's focus turned inward, finding the still point their grandfather had spoken of, the calm center within the moving water. They watched the market not as a catastrophe, but as a phenomenon. The violent sell-off was a powerful, predictable current, but within it, they saw a countercurrent beginning to form. A handful of safe haven assets, often ignored in bullish times, were not just holding their ground but were experiencing a subtle, steady influx. It was a quiet seam of order within the chaos, a place where the flow was not destructive but directional. The decision was not a product of frantic analysis but of deep-seated intuition, a knowing that felt as natural as spotting a trout's rise form. While others scrambled to sell, Alex moved with a deliberate, almost languid precision. The fingers did not stab at the keyboard, they danced across it, executing a series of calculated orders to buy into that quiet, strengthening seam. The trade was a significant one, a commitment that would have been unthinkable weeks before, a bet placed not on hope, but on the immutable physics of fear and flight. Then, they waited. The position swam against the raging current of the market, holding steady as the digital storm raged. There was no anxiety, only observation. They had found their place behind the submerged boulder, trusting the structure they had identified. The turn was as gradual as a changing tide. The initial panic subsided, and the logic of the safe haven trade became apparent to the wider market. The quiet seam Alex had entered began to swell into a powerful, profitable current. Their position, once a solitary act of defiance, was now riding the crest of a new wave. The exit was as measured as the entry, a smooth, unhurried closure that locked in a major win, one of the largest of their career. The noise of the floor, which had been a wall of sound, now resolved into individual voices, some groaning in defeat, others shouting in relief. Alex felt none of their exhilaration or despair. There was only a profound, quiet satisfaction, the same feeling as setting the hook perfectly and feeling the solid weight of a connection on the end of the line. Later that evening, standing once more in the river, the day's triumph was a distant echo. The fly rod was an extension of their arm, the line painting silent, graceful loops in the amber twilight. There was no conscious thought, only a seamless integration of motion and intention. The cast, the drift, the mend all flowed from a place beyond technique, a state of pure flow where the fisherman, the river, and the fly were one single, unified event. In that transcendent moment, the last barrier between the two worlds dissolved. The river was not a metaphor for the market, they were both expressions of the same fundamental truth. The market's volatility was the river's current, the patience of the fisherman was the discipline of the trader. Mastery in both realms had nothing to do with controlling the flow and everything to do with finding one's balance within it. It was the profound, culminating realization that true power, in fishing, in trading, in life, did not come from frantic motion. It came from the courage to find the still point and stand firm within the endless, moving water.